Hello, you're watching the Full Scottish on Broadcasting Scotland. I'm Cameron Archibald. Today I'm joined by Kirsten Oswald, who's a former MP for Renfrewshire, and we'll be discussing various topics around Brexit, what's going on there, the recent dark money going around the Conservative Party, and also the kind of reshuffle and the controversy around Gillian Martin, but also the debate of promotion and demotion with Keith Brown, and then we'll end with Trump and what's going on along around there with his money dealings and also what's happening in general. So, without further ado, let's go on with the show. So let's kick off with yourself, Kirsten. Now, since stepping down, since not being MP anymore, you've been quite busy within the SNP still, though. Do you want to tell us about your recent activities within the party?
Yeah, sure. It's been a bit of a change, admittedly, but it has been an opportunity to do lots of different things. So I'm the convener of my local branch of the SNP in East Renfrewshire, and that's great because it gives me the opportunity to be on the ground and work with the campaigners and activists who I maybe saw only a wee bit more fleetingly beforehand. So, we have been really busy. We've been out and about all over our area in East Renfrewshire. I was out yesterday in Barrhead and Neilston with my colleagues from the Barrhead branch of the SNP, and it was really interesting actually speaking to people who were really genuinely concerned about the Westminster power grab. So it's fascinating to be there on the ground and to have that opportunity to speak to folk and just understand, where people in our communities are coming from and what's concerning them. The Westminster power grab is certainly concerning them. It was also really interesting yesterday to have so many folk actively seek us out to sign up to the SNP. And I know we've had a lot of new members, which is great from my point of view, but hadn't necessarily expected quite so many folk to approach me in the street.
The figure now is about nearly 10,000.
Is that right? It's a lot. I'm not sure exactly what the figure is, but I certainly didn't expect to be inundated with people coming up on a sunny morning when maybe they could have been doing something else and signed up to the SNP.
We at Broadcasting Scotland, we went to the SNP conference, we had many interviews of various different people on a lot of different topics, and one of the main points which was raised with myself was the fact that there's a very kind of strong grassroots element within the conference, and good healthy debate. Others maybe call it division. How would you yourself label it?
I think it's definitely healthy debate. I think it's a really empowering movement. The SNP, I think, is a movement now, the volume of people who've joined. So, in any street, there's going to be likely a few members of the SNP. And my own experience is very much that folk are keen to have these debates. Folk are interested in what each other think, what the experiences are that folk are bringing to the table. I think that's really valuable. And one of the things that I was really pleased about locally recently was bringing a discussion to my branch about it's changing places toilets or toilets for people with multiple and profound disabilities. So they allow folk to access venues, for instance, which the provision of a normal disabled toilet wouldn't allow. So, this is a really big deal for accessibility. And from talking about that at branch, we took a motion to the SNP conference, which was really well received. It was passed unanimously. And I was dead pleased also that the Minister, Kevin Stewart, took such a positive perspective on this, and I can see that moving forward now, because he was, very much of the view that it needed to move forward. That's going to change the way that things are and hopefully improve the situation for people that are in that position, and that is purely based on grassroots discussion. That kind of thing is great, and it gives a lot of people the opportunity to influence the policy of the party, and more of that's got to be a good thing.
Well, since we're talking about the Scottish National Party, let's talk about the Scottish Government's reshuffle itself. There's probably about two main figures that have been kind of cited for it. We would go over all the reshuffling, but it's quite a long list, so we'll stick with the two or three. The first one's Gillian Martin, obviously fairly controversial. About 10 years ago she made comments in a negative tone in regards to those with transgenders and primarily aimed at young students. Nicola Sturgeon obviously took down her nomination for her to be in the cabinet, in which the parties were planning to vote down anyway. How would you see this situation? Would you say it's the right decision to have Gillian Martin not go in the cabinet role, or do you think that maybe over those 10 years, as others have argued, that she's changed as a person?
I think it might be possible to have both of these positions at once, actually, and I think that's probably where I am on it. I think it's, you know, it's a real pity that this has happened, and I think that Gillian herself has been the first one to say that these are not the words that she would want to represent her, and I'm pleased about that, because I don't think that's who Gillian Martin is. However, nonetheless, you know, these were things that were out there and you know, were expressed. So I think that the First Minister absolutely, you know, made the right decision. Let's deal with this and deal with it now. And that's what she's done, and you know, she will move on now and make another appointment. You know, fortunately, there are lots of good people within the MSP group who could step forward, and I think, you know, she won't have a shortage of positive choices that she can make, and you know, it's an important appointment. But I think that the key thing is to look at the decisive way that things have been dealt with, and then people will move on. And I think that is important in political life, that, you know, people can have the confidence that if there is an issue, it will be looked at, it will be dealt with, and that will then, you know, give people a bit more confidence that perhaps that they sometimes have. You know, I know that when I've looked at, you know, issues that have troubled me about things that people have said, there was recently a councillor who made a really unfortunate comment towards members of, I think, the SNP group in a South Lanarkshire council meeting. It was really unacceptable, and I would have hoped that the Labour Party would have maybe had that same decisive attitude to that, because it doesn't do any of us in any parties any favours for these things to be let lie. You know, we have a responsibility, if people are in public life, to deal properly with issues of diversity, whether that be gender, whether it be transgender, whether it be race, whether it be religion, whether it be disability. All of these things are important, and we need to be quite decisive about our position on them.
You spoke about the idea that there's multiple MSPs, should I say, that can take Gillian's role.
Sure.
And someone else made the point, I do believe it was the editor of the Daily Record, that most of or half of the new MSPs going into Cabinet are actually newly elected MSPs.
Yeah.
So the point is that there's actually a large kind of spare talent amongst the parliamentary group. Would you say that that's kind of what the SNP attract, or would you say it's not as simple as that? How would you view this?
I think that there's a diverse group of talents actually among that parliamentary group. I think we're very fortunate. There are people with all kinds of different backgrounds, with lots of different professional experiences that they bring with them into the group, and I think that that's now, you know, telling in terms of the appointments that are being made. And I think that there are, you know, certainly more folk who've got these talents that they could bring to bear should the First Minister choose to appoint them. I think the other really interesting thing is the people who are stepping down from Cabinet will now be sitting on the back benches, and there are some incredibly talented people that are going to be moving to the back benches now. And I think that that is quite a mature party in Parliament now that the SNP can boast, and I think that that is a healthy thing for our country and our democracy too.
One of the points Ian Gray made on Twitter was the fact that Shona Robinson, who was Health Secretary, he said he got the axe for maybe doing a poor job on health. Would you actually characterise those who have been kind of left out of Cabinet as an axe? Would you say that actually, because of their poor job, send them go on the back bench and, you know, let someone else who's maybe better at the job doing it themselves?
No, I don't agree with Ian Gray at all. I think that was a really unfortunate characterisation, and I don't think it was fair or reflected the reality at all. I think by any measure, the Scottish NHS is in a relatively better position than other comparable bodies, for instance, and you know, these are the measures that we have to make. How else do we compare? And I think that Shona has done an exceptionally good job, and I think she's done it with compassion and kindness, and these things are important too, because it's about the people at the centre of it, the patients, and about the staff who work in the NHS. I suspect that they would support my view that Shona Robinson did a good job, and I think that when we look at her resignation letter, it's obvious that she's had a really tough year. Now, of course, none of us would have known that, because she carried on doing her job and making the difficult decisions that government ministers have to make, and she did that with her head held high throughout these very difficult personal times. So I think that if she's decided that it's time for a bit of a change and time to step back, then, you know, really our reaction should be, well, thanks very much for all the work you did, and, you know, I hope that she does enjoy, you know, her time not being a minister, when she's able to concentrate on personal things and you know, continue to focus on her constituency as well.
One of the other curious discussions around the Cabinet reshuffle is Keith Brown.
Yeah.
Now, he is out of Cabinet, but he has now been kind of focusing more on the SNP's kind of campaign strategy. So it's this debate of, is it a promotion, is it a demotion? How would you characterise it?
Well, I don't think it's a demotion. I was really pleased when I heard the news about Keith Brown. You know, he's our new party deputy leader. I think people are pretty happy about that. You know, there's definitely a huge well of support and goodwill towards Keith Brown. He's somebody that commands a great deal of respect, and I think for us to have Keith Brown in that position is really exciting for our membership. So, you know, we are a campaigning party. We are very focused on the activists and on the grassroots. We're always looking at, you know, what comes next and how best we use the resource of these fantastic activists. So to have Keith Brown in pole position leading that, you know, that strikes me as a pretty amazing leadership team that we then have in place, with Nicola Sturgeon as the leader, Keith Brown as the deputy leader, both able to focus on different things as we move forward. That's a real positive for the party, and I strongly suspect that Keith Brown will feel the same.
There was also the idea that, well, not the idea, that Keith Brown is going to be holding 3 national assemblies around the kind of Growth Commission, for not just the SNP, but for all members of who support independence to come along and discuss it. So do you think that maybe with Keith Brown now focusing on the campaign, there's actually a bit of a hint that another second independence referendum could be just around the corner?
It's difficult to know exactly where the corner is, maybe, or how big that corner is, but I suspect that that's what's coming. I'm pretty confident that it is. We have a mandate for an independence referendum. There's obviously a huge body within Scotland that are supportive of independence, and, you know, really looking out and around the world, and, you know, around the UK also. It's difficult to see how that isn't the right thing and the best thing for Scotland, but having Keith Brown in the role and looking at the National Assemblies, that's a great opportunity for us to have the debate about, you know, exactly what might that look like, how best might we go forward, and there'll be a lot of voices there and they need to be heard, and, you know, that I think is part of the, you know, the energy and the positivity of the SNP for me, is that there is that enthusiasm to have discussions, have debate, move things on, look to the future, and, you know, work out how we can make progress. So, you know, there's never a standing still, and I think the National Assemblies will be really positive. The challenge for me will be how to make sure that I try and get to all of them, but I'll not be the only person in that position, because I'm really interested in what people have to say.
Out of curiosity, when you were at the SNP conference, did you feel that there was kind of more unified position on the Sustainable Growth Commission, or do you feel there's a bit more of, as you say, healthy debate around it?
I think that there's certainly debate about it. My discussions with people are pretty positive, I have to say, about the Commission and about the work that they've done. It's been interesting also for me talking to people that were not at conference and are not members of the SNP about the Growth Commission report, and that's quite educational, because, you know, it's not always healthy, although it's always fun to sort of talk only amongst ourselves, so it's good to talk with others. And I was fascinated by the reactions from people that perhaps wouldn't ever have been on my radar as somebody who would seek me out to discuss that, and to discuss it in such positive terms. So I think that, you know, as our debate about independence is moving forward, the Growth Commission plays a really important role in that debate. It gives us an exceptionally good framework for moving forward, but that doesn't mean that, you know, there can't be other voices in the debate. And, you know, I think it was always the intention that, you know, we would continue to have a debate. Nothing stands still, nothing should. So I think it'll be a great summer.
We're going to move on now to the different discussion, which was around the news from the investigative journalist group, The Ferret, when they reported that since 2001, the Scottish Conservative Party have been donated approximately £319,000 from a group called the Scottish Unionist Association Trust, who don't really seem to have a HQ, who don't seem to have much details around them. In fact, I really believe they're located around the area you sort of working, and I've helped Jackson Carlaw. Now, groups like Unlock Democracy have said that such groups could exploit loopholes in electoral law. So there's a lot of questions around this money. The Scottish Conservatives say it's all done legally. How do you view the situation yourself?
I think it's actually quite a troubling situation. So, you know, in terms of democracy and people's confidence in democracy, it is essential that things are absolutely above board, that they are transparent, that our politics is funded in such a way that it is open to scrutiny and people can see, how particular groups or particular campaigns are funded. And, if they don't see that, then it is concerning that they may not have confidence in the process, in the democratic process, which is very unhelpful for all of us. But I think that there are, real and genuine questions around a couple of areas that you've touched on. One of them is the Scottish Unions Association Trust and the funding which that body has provided to Conservative politicians in Scotland. So, as you noted, I know that Jackson Carlaw, who's the MSP for Eastwood, which is where I live, as it happens, has had funding from that group. I know that the Ferret article published a sum of money for Eastwood and for East Renfrewshire, which amounts to, I think, more than £20,000. There's substantial sums of money that are being fed into different constituencies, but it's not clear where the money is coming from. Now, I understand that they've said that that's all above board, and that may well be the case. I'm not here to say that it's not the case, but I think that for it to be secret, for this money to come from, well, who knows where, it's actually not okay. I think it's absolutely right that there are questions asked about this. And, the other side of the coin is the issue of Richard Cook, and, how the Tory party are connected to Richard, who, again, lives in my neighbourhood and who was a 2010 Conservative candidate in East Renfrewshire. And he, the sort of recent investigations are showing, not only has been the conduit for a lot of the dark money pertaining to DUP, for instance, campaigning and advertising, but, actually was the person who, paid, I understand, for some of that advertising, or was the front man, if you like, for some of that advertising, and that relates to the Brexit referendum. So there are questions of transparency and democracy that impact really seriously on our parliamentary processes and on our country. And I think they really do need to be answered. I know that Pete Wishart has written to the Electoral Commission to ask them to look into this, and I think they really need to do that. And I hope that we do get a bit of clarity soon.
Well, you touched on Brexit there, but before we get to that, we know that the UK Conservative Party as a whole in the UK, they've accepted £800,000 from another French organisation called Leica Mobile, who have been formally charged by French authorities for money laundering. Now, since their HQ was raided, the Conservative Party have also still accepted £45,000 from the group and have refused to help French authorities in terms of investigating this group in the UK. We also know that similar organisations have reported that members of this group in London were seen walking around with carrying duffel bags full of money and going to different offices. So obviously, again, this relates to the dark money and dodgy dealings going on. Do you think that the UK government is okay to not help out French authorities in their investigation?
No, I don't think that's okay at all. I think that it's incumbent upon them to make sure that they do help any authority who's trying to get to the bottom of issues of money that's floating around the world and perhaps being used to influence processes that it's not properly there to be used for. I don't think that it does anyone any favours. I think it's a terribly short-term view if they are turning a blind eye to that. It's really unhelpful going forward. There are all kinds of issues around democracy and people concerned about the veracity of the news that they're getting, for instance, and this feeds directly into that. We can't have a situation where people are concerned that the news or the politics of their country is available for purchase, and this kind of concern feeds into worries that people might have that could happen, so that the UK government should really pull their socks up and act on that.
Do you think then on that basis that it's the Electoral Commission not doing enough maybe to investigate it until it's really cited by journalists, or do you maybe see that actually it's not really the Electoral Commission's fault, it's the laws are just not strict enough?
Perhaps the Electoral Commission could do a little bit more, but on the other hand, it's not their job to be an investigative journalist and look from that perspective at every situation in terms of funding. They couldn't possibly have the capacity to do that, but it does fly in the face of good sense and good judgment if the UK government, for instance, are aware that there is a concern of that nature and they are refusing to participate. That isn't proper, and it's not the kind of behaviour that a government should be displaying.
Now, I want to give you more facts and figures, but this time it is related to Brexit though, so moving away from more domestically in the issue. It is Aaron Banks. Obviously he had many pro-leave lobbies raising money. He raised £12 million, but only spent £1 million, and now many are wondering where is the other £11 million. And obviously, as you know, the Brexit campaign, the pro-leave campaign, has been linked to Russia. They've been linked to kind of dodgy Cambridge Analytica kind of groups. As such, you know, many could see this as a big, you know, scandal, and many would argue, well, hold on a second, the Brexit vote was, you know, not rigged, but it was done on a narrative of breaking spending rules and laws. Therefore, we should have a rerun. So, would you argue that actually we need another Brexit referendum to, you know, have a proper, fair campaign?
I'm not sure that there's the appetite for that, I have to say, and I'm concerned. I think probably from the perspective that, you know, you're talking about all the issues that, you know, the issues of Russian involvement. There's the Cambridge Analytica angle, and then there's the coming down to the brass tacks of the issue that, you know, the Vote Leave campaign was not run as a model of integrity and good judgment. It was run with, you know, flat out lies. It was run with disgraceful characterisations of immigrants, for instance, which is deeply offensive and has a horrible impact on people's real lives. I don't think that the UK government as it stands could run a bath, never mind run a Brexit negotiation. So we are in a really difficult position because of all of this. And I do wonder what's going to happen next. And I'm pretty confident Theresa May is wondering what's going to happen next, because despite all the time that's elapsed, I think that the UK government are absolutely no further forward, and that's something that really should trouble all of us.
We'll get to that kind of discussion in a bit, but on the issue of, again, kind of the Brexit kind of theme, why do you think there's not really much of an appetite for another referendum?
I think people are really scunnered with Brexit. I think that the Westminster parties and the way that they have dealt with the Brexit vote, both before but, you know, also since the vote, when, you know, we have two parties who are very much focused on managing their own internal arguments instead of looking at, you know, what has happened and how should it be dealt with. I think that really erodes confidence in the public, or from the public, about how these parties are conducting themselves, and I think that it erodes people's confidence in how, you know, they go forward doing pretty much anything really. However, the only thing that they are essentially doing at the moment is focusing on their internal arguments about Brexit, which does kind of short-circuit everything else. It doesn't leave room for a lot of thought or a lot of forward planning.
Would you defend the SNP in saying that they've done a decent job in terms of being open with the kind of donations they had? Because we know earlier in the year the Scottish Conservatives and Labour were attacking SNP, saying that actually they did meet Cambridge Analytica at one point. So is there any other kind of hidden secrets there might be within the SNP, or do you think that, you know, there's full disclosure there?
I think the SNP have acted entirely properly, and I think that the other parties could take a good degree of lessons from the SNP about how they've dealt with this. The SNP clearly have not worked with Cambridge Analytica. I can't remember the exact quote from the consultant who was concerned with it, but I think it was something. It might have been something about a bunch
cowboys.
of chancers or cowboys. So
yes.
You know, it's good to know that somebody had the judgment, which was clearly displayed there, and that there was a decision that wasn't somebody who would be worked with. I am less clear about the involvement that they've had with others, but I'm pretty pleased with how my party dealt with that whole issue, and I think that in terms of transparency, I'm pretty confident of where we sit.
We're now going to move on to the discussion of Scotland's most popular person of all time, Donald Trump.
Oh yes.
I say with a little bit of tone of sarcasm, because actually he's not that very popular with Police Scotland. Police Scotland have raised the issue that if he does come to visit Scotland, it's going to cost them about £5 million, which they said is going to be a drain on resources and time. Humza Yousaf has written to the UK government asking them to cover the costs, but from what the UK government have said, they've argued it's a devolved issue with Police Scotland, therefore suggesting it should be covered by, you know, devolved authorities. How would you see the situation overall? Would you see Donald Trump being welcome with arms raised in Scotland, or do you see it's going to be
there might be arms raised, but I'm pretty sure they'll be holding placards. I'll certainly be one of these people with a placard should he choose to visit Scotland. I think it's a ridiculous situation. I cannot for the life of me understand why the UK government would take that position. It's completely contrary, and it's just simply unfair. So the previous sort of comparable situations where we've had, you know, big international events which have been to do with UK government decisions in Scotland, they have facilitated funding to make sure that these events are dealt with securely, so the police have not lost out financially. But on this occasion, they're taking apparently the decision that no, this is a devolved matter, so Police Scotland have to fund it. Now, Police Scotland have got a limited amount of resources, as any body does, and they have got a duty to use these resources in the most effective way to do their job. Protecting Donald Trump is absolutely not the best use of their resources. Scotland doesn't want Donald Trump to visit. There are very few people in Scotland who think that that's a good idea, or that he's a desirable character to come and visit our country. There is, I think, some uncertainty about whether he's even going to come. So that really needs to bounce back to the UK government. Do they not know whether he's going to come? You know, what about this special relationship? Is it so lacking in being special that they don't even know what his plans are? I suspect that's probably true. And because of all of that, Police Scotland have quite rightly had to make arrangements for policing the country. They've had to pull all their officers in. There will be lots of cross people with placards. I think that's a given with the history of President Trump. And the UK government are essentially washing their hands of that. I think they need to give themselves a bit of a shake. That's just not okay.
Let's pretend that I know pretty much nothing about Donald Trump, apart from his cameo in Home Alone. Let's pretend that, you know, I know he's coming to visit, but I don't know why everyone's making such a big deal about it. How would you explain to someone like myself why it's such a big deal? What is so wrong with Donald Trump coming to Scotland? Apart from the cost, what is about him that is the issue?
We could be here for a while, but I'll try and condense this. So, yeah, Donald Trump keeps babies and children in cages, and you know that sounds ridiculous. And it's not ridiculous, you know. People have been rightly outraged by this. So, families are being split up when they're seeking asylum. So they're fleeing war, they're running from the most terrible situations, doing the right thing and saying, "I'm here to claim asylum," and finding themselves clapped in jail and with their tiny children taken away from them and put in cages. Most of these families are still not back together. Many of them probably won't ever get back together. The parents have been deported back. The children are in unknown locations. He has spoken about some outrageous things that, you know, he would want to do and has done to women. That's disgraceful. You know, how he can maintain his presidential career, you know, when he's said and done these things is beyond me. He is, in my view, clearly a racist and a dangerous one at that. The list goes on, and you know the people and the communities that he has damaged by his words and by his deeds are so numerous. And the other thing is, you know, his actions and his words, they spread out across the world and they cause a huge amount of harm. So, you know, people who might have felt that their terribly unpalatable views would best be kept under wraps feel empowered by people like Donald Trump to say and to do things, either just on an individual basis or sometimes politically, that we would have found quite unbelievable just a few years ago. That's all on him. Donald Trump is responsible for all of that, and if he comes to Scotland, I'll be there at the front of the queue. There'll be a lot of people at the front of that queue because we don't want him here. He's a disgrace. He should not be coming to our country.
So, all the points you raised, many would say, okay, that's valid and well said. However, Donald Trump is the most powerful man and arguably, in a sense, the most important man in the world. And if you do want to get, for example, a good trade deal with Trump after Brexit, it's important that he comes. Otherwise, we'll get punished for it. How would you kind of respond to that kind of argument?
It doesn't seem to be going terribly well so far, does it? If you've listened to what Trump has had to say in recent weeks and months about the kind of trade arrangements that he wants and about the kind of trade discussions that he's been having with other countries, I think that we are absolutely kidding ourselves if we think that cozying up to Trump and his racist nonsense is going to get us any kind of trade deal. I think the opposite, to be honest, quite likely to be the case. Trump is interested in Trump. He's not interested in anyone or anything else. If we want to make deals and look at how we interact with other countries, then we should, go ahead and do that, of course. But taking the attitude that we're going to turn a blind eye to what Trump's doing, it's the wrong thing, and it's not going to help overall, I'm sure.
There's also more news that came out yesterday by Scotland on Sunday, discussing that Donald Trump actually went to the Bank of Scotland to try and get 30 million in order to buy Hamilton Hall, Victoria Sandhouse in Fife and many other areas around St Andrews. The article is 6,000 words long, so I'm not going to go through every bit of detail to it. It's like reading 3 essays, and we don't have time for that, sadly. But basically says Donald Trump is trying to move on to kind of turf in Scotland to buy more areas. Now, as I said, he was rejected in all these proposals, as is quite obvious now. Do you think that this rejection was right, or do you think it should be fair that any big businessman should be buying more, because then it could maybe generate money?
There's probably a couple of things in there. I have to say that my gut reaction is that I'm delighted if Trump was not able to do that. I think that it's my very firm view that anything to do with Trump is not good for Scotland. It's not good for the people in Scotland. Jobs are incredibly important, and I do welcome anybody that is looking to bring jobs to our communities, but I would be very suspicious of his motives. I'd be very curious about what he's intending to do and why. So I think that it's not a bad thing if he's not been able to take up the desire that he has to take these properties on.
Let's kind of touch on Trump just before we move on. Trump a little bit more on wider issues. Many would argue there's been scandal after scandal after scandal after scandal throughout this debate with Trump, but he's still president. He's caught onto something. He's probably caught onto much of the disillusionment from many Americans in the US. How does he continue to survive in presidency? Is he doing something right? Is there something maybe we're all missing that he's actually got onto?
I think he continued to survive because he's there. He's got there, and there are lots of the things that you've mentioned earlier to do with lack of transparency and funding and links to different places that may have helped, but nonetheless he is there. So it's quite difficult to stop being president once you get into the job. So that's one thing that I think is an unfortunate truth. But I wonder whether he's going to be going anywhere anytime soon. He clearly doesn't want to. So unless someone finds some legal way to remove him, then he's going to stay where he is. I think from our point of view, though, we don't need to like that. We don't need to like that. USA may be our, special ally, and I know Theresa May was very keen to go off and meet Trump, but we don't need to enable the kind of behaviours that he's displaying, because they are abhorrent, they are terrible, and actually I think it's the duty of all right-thinking people to stand up and say, no, that's not for us.
We're going to now move on to the huge issues around Brexit, but before we do, I want to introduce you guys at home watching to one of our new members coming to Broadcasting Scotland, Lindsay Harrison. Thank you very much. Did I get your name right? Lindsay Harrison?
Lindy Harrison.
Lindy
it's
Harrison.
A funny one, I know. It's a funny one.
That's my fault. My apologies. Lindy Harrison, thanks for joining us. Lindy will be joining us for the next while. She'll be taking over shows at some point. Which shows we don't know. We're still kind of fiddling around with that. But Lindy, thanks for joining us. It's great to have you on as well today. We're moving on to the issue of the EU. So obviously it's quite a big issue to kick things off with. We'll start off with just a kind of general basis of the EU, and Nave's kind of confirmed with us that they're rejecting both kind of unions in terms of Labour and Tories. Is there another way which we can have a good Brexit deal, in your view?
As things stand, I think it's a real concern. I almost can't believe the chaos that surrounds Brexit from the UK point of view and the UK government point of view in particular. I think that there's another crunch meeting next weekend, so I don't know what number of crunch meeting we're at, but the Cabinet are having another crunch meeting. They're having a sleepover at this time, so sleeping bags at the ready, but clearly that's pretty unusual. So they presumably foresee that they're going to have to sort of stay in there until they thrash it out. But I don't think they will. They've done that before. I'm sure we've all read the same headlines. We can just keep recycling them. Crunch meeting, this is going to be it. We're going to be sorted out with the plan from the UK government. And then, there's some kind of fudge, and then people carry on. And, it's a continual game of kicking the ball into the long grass. But, at some point the grass is going to run out and the ball's going to drop right over the cliff. And I think we're just about there. And that is unfortunate. That is actually really deeply troubling. And, people really deserve an awful lot better from the government in the UK. I think it's beyond just irresponsible. I think that they're complicit in a terrible act of self-harm for the whole of the UK. And unfortunately, the Labour Party are looking at their shoes and hoping that nobody notices that that's what they're doing while all this goes on. And it's because both of these parties are so split on Europe. They're both so focused on just trying to keep everyone together and not have a major fracture in their own parliamentary groups, that they've taken their eye off the fact that they've got a duty to folk to try and find a sensible way forward. And I do think there's a huge contrast with the way that the SNP have handled this. It couldn't be more different and more stark. But looking forward, there's almost no more time. We all hear what the noises are coming out of the EU. I just don't know what's going to happen next.
You mentioned the SNP there, so let's talk about the SNP, if that's okay. We know that Labour want a customs union, that Theresa May wants to kind of fiddle around with the customs union and try and get a good deal there. Both are rejected. So what's the SNP solution to all this?
Well, I don't think the SNP has a solution to Theresa May or to the Labour Party either. But we have put forward really clear plans, and we've continued to do that since prior to the referendum, in fact, and all the way through. And I think that the other, very relevant point is that whilst we've moved on through this process, there's been continual work and continual dialogue. I think Mike Russell has done an exceptional job in trying to pull things together. You've seen the First Minister making every attempt to engage to try and find ways forward through all of this confusion. And it's coming to nothing, and it's coming to nothing because there isn't a will for that engagement from the other side. And not only is that disappointing, I think it's damaging too. But we will continue to try and have dialogue. You'll have seen that that's continuing. I'm really pleased about Mike Russell's appointment as well. If you want to go back to the cabinet discussions, I think that's well deserved, and I'm sure you'll continue to progress. But the challenge will be, I guess, when we do get to that cliff edge, with how we react to that. The one thing that strikes me is that people are wholly unimpressed by this, and that it is just so terribly unfair for people across the country and Scotland, but more broadly, that this is what their politicians are bringing upon them. They really should expect better, no matter what your party loyalties are. You really should expect better from the people that are in charge.
Within the document by the Scottish Government called Scotland's Place in Europe, it discusses the idea of having a similar sort of Norway model, where you're in the single market, you're in all different kind of similar unions. Economically speaking, things are very viable. Many would argue that actually maybe you're not really leaving the EU in that case, that actually you're still in the EU and you're still restricted. How would you kind of refute that point?
If it was up to me, we wouldn't be leaving the EU at all. And that's certainly a common feeling where I live, that people are very European as well as having their Scottish identities. But I think that the whole point of that is that is the sort of pragmatic look at, well, where are we, and how can we get the best out of the situation that we could find ourselves in. So for all that I really don't want to leave the EU under any circumstances, I do see that it's really important, and that the Scottish Government and the SNP, I think, have got really clear lines and clear positions on making sure that we have these discussions and have the options, such as the Norway model that you discussed. But as things stand, that isn't mirrored in terms of clarity from the UK government, either towards Brussels or towards Scotland. And that is the thing that really, really needs to be sorted out. The cliff edge is fast approaching.
I mean, when it comes to Broadcasting Scotland, anytime you do these kind of interviews with any politicians, it's always really complicated to kind of get your idea of what's kind of going on, especially in Scotland, since not only do you have have a debate around the EU, you have a debate around Holyrood and the power grab as well. I don't know about you, Lindy, but I'm just kind of lost on it all. I mean, how would you kind of give clarity to that sort of debate? What needs to kind of happen in order to kind of clear up the kind of confusion there?
I'm not sure people are that confused. I mean, undeniably, there's a heck of a lot to take in. And somebody in your position is looking at all the details, and that can get, it's certainly something that you can get bogged down in. But in terms of the principles of the thing, yesterday, for instance, yesterday morning, I was out at 9 a.m. in Neilston, standing outside the shops, and people were in and out buying their newspapers and rolls and coming to speak to us, and they actually seemed to be perfectly clear about what the issues were that were concerning them. So they were concerned about the prospects for Scotland going forward. They were concerned about being pulled out of the EU against their will, and what might that mean, and why they didn't think that should happen. And they were concerned about the power grab. And one of the fascinating things was people saying, I'm really concerned about this, I'm really unhappy about it, giving it a list of 3 or 4 reasons why they were unhappy about it, and then saying, but I don't know much about that. And clearly they did know much about it, so people, I think, have got a pretty firm grasp on what the concerns are, and I do think that they've got a pretty firm grasp on the fact that the government in London are not doing what they ought to be doing.
Mm-hmm. When it comes to bad scenarios, there's always the idea of, just rejecting the deal entirely by no deal. I mean, I don't know about you, Lindsay, but...
What would, say there is no deal, what happens then? What does that picture actually look like for us going forward?
I think the trouble is that nobody knows that. That's a genuine and very real concern, because the UK government have not got a plan for that. So whilst they might beat their chests and say, we're quite happy to have a no deal, that's fine. They don't know what that might mean. And I do think it's a bit of a stretch for the UK government to take that position and say that, that it's fine, and not know what it might mean. If they don't know what it might mean, how on earth do they expect people to have any confidence in their ability to deal with that? It's really unacceptable. It's really... It almost defies belief, and I do think that we're at a very particular time in politics in the UK at the moment. I think that if you were sitting 10 years ago, hopefully 10 years in the future as well, and looking at this time now, you would think that it was a complete shambles. Almost defied belief that the UK government are in such a bad way. I do think that the Labour opposition are not in the best place either. And all of that is really detrimental and damaging to people, and this is a prime example of that. Nobody knows what that means. How can that possibly be the case? How can the government possibly leave people in the dark? And the reason is because they're too busy fighting with each other.
Before we go on to discuss more on Brexit, we can actually hear outside an Orange Order march, I do assume, just guessing from the
I was trying to pretend that I couldn't hear anything.
So just while they're playing it, so let's actually talk about what happened yesterday, because we had Arlene Foster come to Fife and give a speech to the Orange Lodge there, and there was a lot of kind of controversy when it was announced that she was coming to Scotland, to Fife, to give this speech, because obviously around the Orange Order it's quite controversial. How do you view Arlene Foster coming to Scotland and giving such a speech? Because others have pointed out that if it was the other way around, with Nicola Sturgeon going to Northern Ireland discussing at a pro-Catholic event, it would have been, people have been up in arms about it.
I think that's the exact comparison, and of course that wouldn't happen because that wouldn't be appropriate or proper. So it feels a little bit like she's keen to make the news and keen to get some publicity. Perhaps there are things that she is less keen to talk about, and perhaps this is an opportunity for her to have a news agenda that's of her own making. But I don't think that it's particularly helpful for her to have come to Scotland. I think that we have to really carefully look at how best we make sure that there are no there are no ways that people can treat others unfavourably, perhaps because of their religion. Sectarianism is a huge issue in the west of Scotland, for instance, and we've done a pretty good job in moving forward with that. And I saw comments from Nil by Mouth, actually, the charity that do such a great job in educating particularly young people on these issues, and they also thought that it was a troubling and unhelpful thing to happen. I think that they probably hit the nail on the head with that. It's not the best thing to happen. There are probably better things that people could be talking about than that.
Mm-hmm. So just tying in sort of Ireland and tying that back to Brexit, what I was going to ask was, in terms of the border question for Brexit, how how would you envision how we're going to handle that going forward? Because it seems at the moment that there's definitely an impasse and even disagreement within the Tory party about how we're going to move forward with this.
Yeah, there's definitely disagreement within the Tory party about it, and it's, I think, really difficult for sometimes the Westminster, commentariat and people in that Westminster bubble to appreciate that, this is actually a really big issue. It's a really big problem. That there is nothing, I think, starker than the issue of that border in terms of the lack of planning and the lack of preparedness for Brexit. I've seen some really interesting stuff on the television about folks of walking back and forward around the border as they go about their daily lives, and getting a pint of milk here and going and buying some bread there, and they go to work on that side, but they might go to school there, and that's really, really stark. Also, the issue of the border itself is like a very big wiggly line with trees, rivers, cows, you name it, all over it. How could that border be properly dealt with? This is it's a problem, and talking about technology and seamless transitions and all that, yeah, these things sound great, but as far as I can see, there's been absolutely no provision made for that, and crucially, there's no agreement. So the UK government perhaps need to stop talking to themselves and actually engage in proper, serious dialogue, and with a wee bit of urgency, given where we are now, with the EU and with Ireland as well. But at the moment, I don't see them doing so.
Let's kind of create the hypothetical scenario, and it's hypothetical because obviously a lot is unknown. Let's create a scenario where the UK goes, right, okay, we're going to have to kind of make ground here by giving up ground, so we're going to stay within the customs union, but we're going to give Ireland a special deal. So it's going to have borderless, or somewhat borderless, and that trade will be pretty much smooth between Ireland and Northern Ireland. Would you say then that in the case of a second independence referendum, Scotland could have that similar deal, hypothetically speaking, if that was the case?
I think anything is up for discussion. So anything that allows for seamless movement is a good thing. It's just that the Tories have not got a plan for that. I think that it's very likely as we move forward, and if you think of an independent Scotland, that of course we would want to have as positive and as easily accessible trading relationships with our neighbouring countries as possible, because clearly that would be beneficial for Scotland, and clearly it would also be beneficial for those that we are neighbouring and that neighbour us. They would be our closest neighbours, and it just seems to fly in the face of common sense if there was to be anything other than a concerted effort to make sure that we could trade freely. I've no doubt we would.
What about then in the case that may point out that within your party you have a lot of your own members that voted leave? I think the figure was around just under 40%, and that's similar for Labour and similar to the Conservatives, actually bigger than the Conservatives. So if your party is going to the next independence referendum and they're kind of giving a pro-EU line, how would you kind of win over the leavers within your party?
Well, some of them might have been won over already by the chaos that's gone on, both in terms of the things that the Vote Leave campaign said, which have proven to be utterly nonsense. It was highly irresponsible. I don't think there's many SNP members that would be very keen on some of the narrative that has come since, either in terms of borders and immigration and so on. So perhaps some of that is actually moved on in any case. But I think there's always a positive case to be made for Europe. I certainly feel very European. I think that many others feel similarly. And in terms of an independent Scotland, of course these discussions can be had, but it's a positive discussion to be had with people as we move forward. And that's the way that we would usually approach things. I would quite look forward to that. I quite like the EU referendum from a campaigning point of view. On my doorstep, just unfortunately, the result certainly wasn't something I liked. So
how would you expect that Brexit is going to affect trade, particularly in Scotland as well?
It's a real worry, and there are some very straightforward issues that we have to deal with, which have not yet been dealt with. So that there are concerns about how we transport goods and how they are going to get through to the markets. That doesn't seem to have been bottomed out at all. It's a huge issue for fishermen and farmers, for instance. I think that there are potentially huge opportunities for the Scottish brand, in terms of any accelerated trading, but I think there are huge concerns about that as well in terms of some of the trade deals that the UK government are talking about. So it's really important as we go forward that we do focus on getting the best for Scotland in terms of trade, in terms of how we deal with the businesses, with the producers in Scotland as well. And at the moment, I think that there are some particular concerns, from different sectors that they do really need to be dealt with. But some of the worrying comments about, for instance, the port of Dover, I think are causing deep worry amongst producers, and they're certainly not bottomed out by any standards yet. So we definitely need to see an awful lot more from the UK government on these things.
Just before we finish up, I want to ask your view on the comparison between the independence referendum in 2014 and the Brexit referendum in 2016. Did you see much of a difference between how different campaigns went, or were they similar? How would you view it?
I think they were hugely different. So, the EU campaign in East Renfrewshire, where I live, was a positive and cheerful campaign, but then 74% of people in East Renfrewshire voted to remain in the EU, so it's not really a good comparator for the rest of the country, perhaps, and there was no Leave campaign there. So, we were able to campaign quite happily. But in terms of the bigger picture, the independence referendum in 2014 was a real enthusiastic act of democracy, I think, on the part of the Scottish people, and it was a real grassroots effort. It was a fantastic thing to be a part of, and it was about looking forward positively and people having their voices heard, and the potential that Scotland has. And I think that you couldn't probably get a starker contrast to red buses driving about with lies on them, and these terrible posters about people coming from other countries. I find that so distasteful and personally offensive. I can't begin to tell you how different that is to the inclusive, positive narrative of the Yes campaign, which is what drew me to the SNP in the first place.
Kirsten Oswald, thank you very much for joining us today at Brookings in Scotland, and that is pretty much us done for today. I might not be in this seat in the future because you're going to see a lot more of Lindy very soon, so look forward to that. Lindy is going to be brilliant, I tell you that for now. So if you'd like to see what you see here more often, then go to our website at www.broadcastingscotland.scot, where you can go to the support page and you can give kind of different supports if you want, and if not, to donate money to help give these programmes expand a bit further so we can get quality content. But that's me just today. Thank you very much for joining us, and I'll see you next week.